I just want to say thank you all for attending today. I know it can be a little challenging to attend a webinar in the middle of the day, so we really appreciate you guys joining us. My name is Nicole Jarvis. I am an Assistant Director of Programs here at Cancer and Careers and also one of our in-house social workers, and I'll be presenting today on newly diagnosed. Just before we begin, a few housekeeping items that's related to accreditation for those of you who are looking for it. Today's webinar is accredited for CEUs by ANCC, the California Board of Registered Nursing, the New York State Education Department State Board for Social Work, and the Society for Human Resources Management, as well as NASW. If you plan on receiving continuing education credit for this program from any of the bodies that I mentioned, please proceed with the following steps. You must either call in or log in individually. Participants who listen in on someone else's line or log in will not receive credit. Second, you must complete and submit the evaluation and post-test, as well as receive a passing grade on the post-test, which is 80% or higher. Following today's session, you will receive an email with all of this information. That email will be sent by 5 p.m. tomorrow, so Thursday the 9th. And I just want to make a quick note that the planners and presenters for this program have not disclosed any pertinent financial relationships or conflicts of interest, and that no commercial support was provided for this program. And just for those of you who aren't aware of some of the services that we offer, we have our website. We offer publications available in English and Spanish. We have our job search tools and our resume review. And we also offer financial assistance grants. So today's presentation is called Newly Diagnosed, Getting Started. I'm guessing that many, if not all of you on this call, chose to be here because you consider yourselves to be newly diagnosed. Now, we do know that this phrase can mean different things to different people. Some of you may have been diagnosed just a few days ago, or perhaps still trying to wrap your heads around everything that's happening. Some of you may have already started treatment and may have already made some choices about how to move forward in regards to your job. Some may be facing a recurrence and looking for new approaches to balancing work and treatment this time around. Or maybe you're in yet a different place than ones that I've mentioned. Really, regardless of where exactly you are on your journey today, we hope that you'll leave today with some new helpful information that's relevant to you and can really help determine the best path forward that's going to work best for you. I do also want to acknowledge that while there is guidance throughout this presentation for people who are either working or looking for work, we do really lean into the part of our conversation focused on those trying to balance an existing job with a diagnosis. So for those of you on this call who are actively looking for work, I do encourage you to also check out our many job search specific programs and resources as an accompaniment to the information that I presented today, just so that you can feel even more prepared for the process. Now, before we jump into exploring the various work concerns that often present themselves early on in a cancer journey, as well as the potential approaches to managing them, I'd like to start by talking about some common misconceptions about cancer and work, which we often hear from people who are encountering them and can feel particularly daunting. So some of these misconceptions include that people diagnosed with a serious or chronic medical condition don't want to work. People diagnosed with a serious and/or chronic medical condition can't work, or people balancing work and medical condition will not be as productive. And unfortunately, this list goes on and on. What's important to remember when thinking about work is that it's often about a lot more than a paycheck and benefits, which of course are important, but there's an identity piece to it also that shouldn't be overlooked. Many people take pride in their jobs and employment, and they really get satisfaction from working, regardless of the industry or role, because understandably, work is a really big part of who we are. So this idea that cancer takes away the ability or the desire to work is false. We list these here really to highlight the range of misconceptions around a cancer diagnosis as they relate to work. And we'll be discussing strategies and tools in order to help you understand how to approach your situation in order to make really informed decisions about whether, if, or how to work during all or part of treatment. So now we jump right to the heart of this work and cancer conversation, and that's of the diagnosis and the work dilemma. For many people, the question of how work factors in, or really whether it factors in at all, becomes really, really important. And it can be really challenging to look at this big picture when you're focused on addressing a health crisis, because all of these unknowns can feel understandably overwhelming. It's important in these moments to acknowledge the reality of what's going on, and then from there to isolate and answer some specific questions in order to illuminate this best path forward that we're all talking about today. So now the question becomes, what are the questions to consider asking yourself in order to make those best decisions about balancing work and a cancer diagnosis? A good place to start is by spending some time considering really what your wants are and not just what your needs are. They tend to vary from person to person because everyone's different. And when people start to list out what their wants and their needs are, they sometimes find that they aren't necessarily totally in alignment with one another. And that's totally okay. The idea here is to take a step back and start evaluating the individual parts within this bigger picture, and just trying to figure out what's true for you in your particular circumstance. So some examples. What are your financial and insurance needs? Now, for some people, these are going to be driving these decisions about whether or not to work during treatment. But for others, that might not be the case. So consider also asking yourself, how is your identity connected to your job? As I mentioned, identity does play a role. Maybe you love what you do and you want to make sure you're able to continue doing it because it's going to help you cope during treatment. Again, this isn't going to be the case for everyone, but the point is to really have a sense of how that comes into play for you specifically. And of course, no person is only their job or their diagnosis. So what might you want to consider in terms of your personal life? Do you have obligations to family or other loved ones that needs to be prioritized? What do you think might be needed in terms of self-care, which we all know is so important for our health? You may also find that once you start asking yourself these questions, a lot more questions might start to crop up that maybe you aren't sure how to answer by yourself, and that's also okay. It's also completely understandable if this part of the process is starting to feel really overwhelming and you're not sure what to do. Particularly if you're experiencing strong emotions related to having received the news of your diagnosis. This is really big news, and it can bring around a range of feelings of shock, stress, anxiety, depression, numbness, feelings of urgency to really get things moving. And this is another list that can go on and on. Regardless of what's going on with you emotionally, it's really important for you to know that your feelings are valid and there's really no right reaction to have. So allowing yourself to feel these emotions can actually be a really important part of preparing to make decisions. So first things first, taking a beat can be really helpful in order to get yourself centered and focused. Think what you need to do next and give yourself that space to breathe and process. This can then make the next steps that you have to take feel just like a little bit more manageable. So over the next few slides, we're going to discuss what it looks like to gather information, to get organized in order to better understand what your options are, and to make an action plan for moving forward with treatment, surgeries, medical interventions, and then how work might fit into these factors. I do want to quickly acknowledge that sometimes decisions do need to be made rather quickly because of specific circumstances. So it may not always be possible to apply this exact process to every single decision that you make. And this is okay too. What we're trying to do here is to really offer some tips and tools that can just help with making these decisions and planning just that much easier. So the next step in this process is gathering information that can really help guide your decisions that you need to make. So to simplify this process just a little bit, we break down the type of information together into the three categories, which you can see laid out here. There's medical and treatment information, work information, and legal information. Over the next few slides, we'll take a deeper dive into each of them just to understand what specifically falls into these three categories and to have just that much more familiarity with them. So, as I mentioned, the place to start when it comes to gathering medical and treatment information is your medical team. Ask questions about the timeline for surgery and any other treatment protocols like chemo or radiation, as well as some of the potential side effects that can be expected. By understanding this information, you can perhaps start to figure out whether or not it really will be possible or realistic for you to work during all or even part of treatment. It's also important for you to be open with your healthcare team about the specifics of what your job entails day to day, which includes any concerns that you might have, as well as what your work-related goals are. So they can help work with you on a plan for balancing work and cancer that works for what you want as well. So an example is taking a proactive approach to making sure that your chemo treatments are scheduled in a way that lines up with your needs and your commitments at work. This can really aid in helping you to feel like a more active participant in your care while also feeling in more control of your work responsibilities. Areas that you can regain control after cancer are really important because cancer does bring about feelings of a major loss of control. So an example of this might be that your doctor says they would like to see you in 2 weeks, and the appointment scheduler says that you can come in on a Thursday morning. But you know that you have a set meeting with your team every Thursday morning that's really important for you to participate in. So it's worth asking if Wednesday or Friday might work instead. This may not always be possible, of course, but remember that asking can't hurt, and what it does is really relieve you of some of that internal pressure and stress, and also allows you to be a bigger part in the planning process. So now we move into our conversation about gathering information about work itself. So this part of the process can help you to start to think about how you can manage your treatment protocol with the way that your company works and also the duties of your job. So for instance, researching your workplace's existing policies and flexibilities can lend insight into how to devise a plan should you decide to continue working during all or part of treatment. Also, learning about your company's leave policies can help determine your ability to take time off, either in large or smaller chunks of time. Much of the information that you're looking for might be accessible through an online employee portal or in a handbook that you locate and leaf through on your own without even having to speak with anybody. That said, you may also prefer to have a conversation with a person, or you might find that you need to reach out to someone in order to get your hands on a copy of that employee handbook, or just to have your questions answered. Also, if you've been at a company for a while and have seen coworkers experiencing personal challenges, whether these were health-related or family-related, think back to how they were handled, both the good and bad aspects, and consider how that might color your situation and experience, and might change how you would approach the situation. If you have a close enough relationship to these people, perhaps consider talking to them about how the company responded to them. You might be able to get some good tips on things that worked for them and things that didn't. So as we discuss the process of gathering legal information, I do want to remind you all that since I'm a social worker and the law is not my area of training or licensure, if you do have specific questions about your situation that are of a legal nature, I absolutely encourage you to reach out to an attorney or a legal organization. I will provide some resources at the end of today's presentation that can be really helpful in these circumstances. But the law does play a really important role in thinking about and talking about work and cancer, and that's really why we include it. Understandably, it can be kind of scary to start thinking about the law and our jobs. So I want to stress that we're not going to be talking about this topic because we think it's likely that an employment situation is going to become litigious, but rather legal and practical issues do not exist in separate vacuums. Often when there's a practical concern, there's likely a legal piece to it as well. And also for many people, the law becomes a key tool for helping them pull together a plan for working through treatment if they're able to qualify for protections. So again, if you're interested in learning about which federal or state workplace laws or protections may or may not be available to you, I do encourage you to reach out to some of the legal organizations that I'll mention later on. You can also find more broad and reliable information about laws on various government websites, as well as educational blogs and resources. Now, with all of that said, for the purposes of today's discussion, I want to discuss one key law in order to help provide just a foundation for any additional fact-finding that might be necessary. This law is the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA. So to start, the ADA is a federal law, and this means that it applies in all 50 states. The part that's particularly relevant to work in cancer comes from Title I, And like all laws, it has certain requirements that must be met in order to use it. In very broad strokes, they are that your employer must have a minimum of 15 employees for the law to apply to them. You must have the necessary skills, certification, experience to do the job. And finally, your disability must meet the criteria as it's determined by the ADA. If you meet all of these requirements, the ADA can protect you from discrimination and can also potentially provide access to what are called reasonable accommodations, which I'll dive into a little later in this presentation. Again, this is a really quick overview, so you know that the ADA is something to consider. And again, I encourage you to speak with a legal professional in order to determine if you are eligible to use the ADA's protection. And you also notice that we make a note on this slide that there are state fair employment laws that can actually have a further reach than the ADA. So, you know, for instance, if your job or your employer doesn't have 15 employees, you have less, you might actually qualify for state fair employment protections that might provide the same, similar, or actually even greater protections under the laws. So now we move to getting organized. Once you've gathered this information, getting and staying organized is really the next step. In general, being organized makes life easier. It removes some of the chaos that we all naturally face in our lives. But after receiving a cancer diagnosis, staying organized can be extremely helpful and can even have a positive impact both physically and emotionally. Some of the ways that staying organized can help is it can aid in the various decisions that you may need to make. This includes the decision of whether or not to work. It can help you to feel a sense of control, which we discussed is something that's a major challenge after a cancer diagnosis. It can help decrease work-related stress. And it also allows you to be better prepared for any of the potential hiccups or issues that could arise along the way. So I want to just break down some best practices for getting and staying organized over these next few slides. So keeping all of your paperwork and documents in one place may seem like a really simple thing, but it can make a world of difference. Whether you're a fan of digital files or you prefer to print out hard copies that you can actually touch and highlight, having this centralized storage spot can reduce the headache of constantly searching for important details necessary to make appointments, communicate with your insurance company, and so on. The same way that you might need to always put your keys in the same place, having this stuff at the ready is really, really helpful. It's also the case that during your initial information gathering, you may come across pieces of information that aren't totally relevant today, but could be really useful down the line. Having all your information stored in the same place means that you'll know exactly where to look for it when the time comes to need that extra information. Next, taking notes during your appointments. Again, using a notebook is something you might prefer, or your smartphone or a tablet. We offer our Living and Working with Cancer workbook, which actually has a notes section in it that can help you keep track of things. You know, tape recording may be an option as well, as long as the person you're speaking with is okay with that. But the bottom line really is that these are all tools that can be used so that you don't have to rely solely on your memory, which can be challenging to rely on when you have so much going on and so much stress and things just start to feel a little overwhelming. Now, if you feel comfortable, bring a friend or family member to your appointment. While you might rather attend appointments and treatments on your own, that is an entirely personal decision. But if you're open to having someone from your support network join you, they can act as another recording device and perhaps catch things that you may have missed or forgotten in your conversations with doctors, because a lot of the time these can feel like just information overload. Also, having someone with you can really keep your spirits up and distract you in times that you might be feeling a little down or isolated or lonely. Next, it's a good idea to write everything down. This way you have a record to refer back to. These might be questions or concerns or observations to discuss in future appointments, keeping track of questions that might arise outside of appointment times regarding treatment or side effects, or even certain observations you've made during or after treatment can allow for a much more involved process where you're able to be an active participant in your treatment plan. Again, you might be sensing the theme here is that what we're trying to do is really provide you with a sense of control over your situation and to equip you with some ways that you can be a more active participant. So in these notebooks, it can be really helpful to write down ideas and even scripts for future workplace conversations like phone calls or project updates. It can also be a place to keep track of those that are involved in your care or your employment conversations. And honestly, it can be really helpful just to have a place to jot down any tips that are given to you from others in the cancer community, because if I've learned anything from working in the cancer community for the last decade, it's that people really want to help each other, and everybody has a good way of doing something or something that they didn't like. So it's a good idea to kind of compile that list and see what might work for you. Overall, taking the time to prepare and get organized on days when you have more energy can really pay off on the days that you have less. Knowing you can turn to this place and get the information that you need or be reminded of the things that you need to be reminded of can just take a little less pressure off of you. So now that you've put in the work of identifying information and getting yourself organized, it's time to make a decision about whether or not to work. So to do this, review the information that you've gathered and think through how it might be applied in alternative scenarios. Talk through some of the pros and cons of your options with those close to you who understand your circumstances, as they can really help to provide different perspectives, which can highlight aspects that you may not have considered yourself or maybe are a little bit too overwhelmed to even consider on your own. Also, remember, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing situation where you're either working through all treatment or not working at all. For plenty of survivors, strategically taking shorter periods of time off, whether that means 2 weeks to recover from surgery, a few days here and there for chemo appointments, is what really allows them to continue to stay actively engaged in their work. I also want to mention that if you're looking for work when you receive a diagnosis, you can also think about what it would look like to get a job during this stage and what your considerations would need to be in order to make a decision around working or not. It's certainly not an easy one, but again, really preparing in advance can alleviate some of that stress. So I want to move on to talking about creating an actual plan for yourself. As I've mentioned throughout, after receiving a cancer diagnosis and throughout treatment, people will feel like a lot of things are out of their control. So creating an action plan to the extent that it is possible can help you empower yourself and maybe even regain a sense of control over at least aspects of your circumstances. So here we've laid out the elements of a successful action plan. First, it addresses your unique needs and goals in terms of treatment, work, your personal and family life and obligations, and so on. It's also key that there's some sense of priority given to the various items on your action plan. But it's also important to remember that the treatment experience can be and is often fluid. It's possible things may change. It's likely things may change. And while the plan that you outlined might seem airtight today, it may have to be modified over time as things evolve. Maybe your response to treatment is better or worse than anticipated. So it's important to stay flexible and communicate appropriately at work. Additionally, when we think about a successful action plan in the context of work, it also incorporates your employer's needs as well as your own. Now, I'm certainly not saying that your employer's needs should ever be put above yours or that there's no room to negotiate how work gets done. But rather, it's important to make sure that these things get woven into your thinking as well, so that it's kind of a best case scenario for everyone involved. Another critical component of an action plan is identifying the places where others might be able to pitch in. For some, asking for help can be a real challenge, with or without cancer. But when and where you feel comfortable doing so, asking for help can really alleviate some of the stress and worries that may be weighing you down. In a work context, this may just mean sitting down with your manager or supervisor so you can think through together how coworkers might be able to step in and help. Finally, as we've already discussed, there's a benefit to having things written down, and the same is true here. A practice we often encourage is keeping something called a work diary. This can be a useful tool in helping you to evolve your action plan based on your needs. So I just want to break down a little bit about what this looks like. So ultimately, it can help you map out an overview of what treatment is likely to look like in both the short and longer term. By collecting important treatment-related dates, such as for surgery or chemo, The information is then available to you about potential recovery time, side effects, etc. And you can then compare them to your work calendar and see where there might be any issues or conflict in terms of scheduling. If you have a really big project coming up that you want to just get out of the way before you start, if it's possible, maybe talk to your doctor about if that's possible to push back a week or so. But of course, there may be certain appointments and treatments that are date specific, so they may need to take priority over those work deadlines. But like I said, as we discussed earlier, it can be worth talking with your healthcare team to see where there might be flexibility. Your schedule is actually an area where there's opportunity for you to become a much more active participant in your care by advocating for your needs. And ultimately, again, feeling more control of the process. The more you speak up, the more voice you have, and it will be taken into account by your providers. So once you've started to lay out the broad overview of treatment as a whole, you can then start to really drill down into mapping out what each individual work week might look like. And keep notes on your experiences of how the weeks actually play out as they're going along. So track how you're feeling at certain times of the day. Are you waking up early in the morning and feeling great, and then by the afternoon really starting to feel sluggish? What side effects are you experiencing? And if or how you were able to identify any ways to mitigate some of those symptoms. So like I said, if you're feeling really good in the morning and then fatigue hits in the afternoon, how can you get the most of your work done early in the day? By tracking these, you can really reveal some important patterns and then work with them strategically to kind of address and alleviate. So another example might be planning to eat at specific intervals throughout the day to combat nausea that you're experiencing, or even creating a schedule of breaks that aligns with when you've noticed you're experiencing those strong bouts of fatigue. Then once you have a reliable log, you might also use it to begin brainstorming job modifications that can address your needs. And again, I will be talking about how to implement some of those job modifications in just a little bit. And then there's cases where, as I mentioned, reasonable accommodations do come into play. So you can really use these notes in order to plan out and drive some of those conversations with your employer. And again, it's really nice to not have to rely on your memory in these kinds of circumstances. So as we talk about modifications, I do want to return to the ADA. So as I mentioned in the earlier slide, one of the potential benefits that's available through the ADA for those who qualify is access to what are called reasonable accommodations. And reasonable accommodations are modifications to your job, your schedule, or the environment that you work in that makes it possible for you to perform the essential duties of your job. On this slide, you'll see a few resources that delve a little deeper into reasonable accommodations and how to request them. I really do suggest utilizing Ask Jan or the Job Accommodation Network, as they are kind of the go-to resource for that and can really help you to brainstorm and think about what your needs are and how to address them. But we'll talk a little bit about potential accommodations and how to identify them over the next few slides. So there are a number of questions that you can ask yourself in order to help getting you to that point where you can identify what potential accommodations might be helpful for you. So on this slide, we have a number of questions that you can ask yourself just to get started and thinking about that. Some examples include, can you work a full-time but flexible schedule? So this really means that you're working the same number of hours, but they're just distributed differently. So as I mentioned before, maybe you feel your best early in the morning and by late afternoon, you're not doing well. Maybe you can turn your 9 to 5 day into a 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. day, or perhaps take time out during the day to go to appointments and making up time later in that day or later in that week so that you're still working those hours. They're just, again, at different times. Well, I totally understand that this may not be suitable for every kind of work. This could be a really great solution for people who do project-based work. And so it's really just about getting things done as opposed to getting things done in a specific time range. Another question might be, can you work from home part-time or full-time? So obviously these days that might be looking a little bit different and might be a much more viable option than it had been in the past. But again, it's always worth asking. There might already be a policy about remote work in your employee handbook, And if not, perhaps one could be created, because as this pandemic has shown, a lot of jobs can be done from home that were originally assumed to only be in office. So it's always worth just asking and exploring what that option might look like. If your job includes allocated break times, maybe it's possible for you to take more frequent or additional breaks. Maybe you split the existing breaks into smaller chunks of time. Perhaps for you, it's about getting access to special equipment, ergonomic chairs. If you're having severe neuropathy in your hands, perhaps you can get speak to type software so you don't have to type as much. There are a lot of different options that can alleviate some of the challenges that come along with some of the side effects from chemo and other types of treatment. So again, Ask Jan is a really great resource for identifying what solutions might exist, especially in the sense of physical modifications. And then yet another possibility might be to have certain tasks or projects removed from your job. So let's say you are responsible for replacing the water cooler jug, but you're having a lot of trouble lifting things. That doesn't sound like an essential part of your job, so perhaps that could be passed along to someone else. Again, these really are just examples to help you start thinking about accommodations and also to remove some of the myths around the concept. A lot of the myths include that they are expensive or unlikely to be approved. According to the Job Accommodation Network, most accommodations actually cost an employer $500 or less, and actually many cost nothing. So it's important to be resourceful. Really think about your environment and what might be causing the specific challenges that you're experiencing. And really, remember, it's all fluid. What might make work easier today might be different tomorrow. This is not a one-time only opportunity, and it's important to note that you are able to ask for more than one accommodation if necessary. And that's certainly the case. Maybe you need a flexible schedule and you need a new office chair. Any of these things can be considered accommodation, and if you can make the case for it, they can really change your ability to work. So moving back to this concept of the work and cancer diary, many people also find them useful tools in thinking through optimal times for treatment. So really looking back over your notes about those prior treatments to identify any patterns that you noticed can then be used to schedule your appointments at times that would be more conducive to your work schedule and energy levels. And again, you might not know this until you've been in treatment for a couple of weeks. And so, taking the time to recognize that and recognize those patterns, and also knowing that things might change as time goes along, can just be helpful in creating plans for the right now and what's going to work for you right now. So again, the example here is if you're feeling exhausted 3 or 4 hours after treatment, it might be worth considering scheduling a 2 p.m. appointment so that you'll be off of work when that fatigue hits. Or a lot of people will schedule their appointments for Friday afternoon. And if they work Monday through Friday, that means that they have the weekend to recover and don't have to worry about taking more time off from work. Also, keeping a detailed written record of your day-to-day activities at work can prove beneficial on a number of levels. So this can include a description of your projects and then the associated tasks with them, what you've done, as well as a to-do list with the next steps. Really keeping notes in this way can help you stay organized and effectively manage your time as you move through these days, which can sometimes seem like a little bit of a blur when you have so much going on. It also creates a log of the tasks that you've accomplished that day or week or month. And that can be really helpful if and when chemo brain or fatigue starts to impact your memory or your ability to focus. I think we've all been in that scenario where we're like, I could have sworn I did that, but I don't know for sure. This way you know for sure. This way you wrote it down on this date, I did this. And so that you can revisit it and hopefully check that task off of your to-do list. Also, tracking hours and assignments can prove really valuable if a worst case scenario arises at work and you start to suspect that there may be some discrimination taking place. Again, as I mentioned, we don't bring this up because we think that's likely to happen and that discrimination is going to happen. And obviously, I really hope that it never does happen to any of you on this call. But unfortunately, we do know that some people do run into problems in their workplaces. And in those instances, having a notebook where you've been keeping a detailed account of your time and accomplishments can really prove valuable so that you have a little bit more of a leg to stand on in the event that you find that things are going a little south. And finally, as this last bullet point suggests on this slide, your work in cancer diary can be a good place for you to draft and revise what is called a disclosure plan. Now, whether or not to disclose at work or in other areas of your life, it's a really incredibly personal decision. It's also one that requires a lot of thought. So we share this slide very often in a lot of our presentations because it really is such a nuanced decision. What's important to know and remember here is that you are not required or obligated to share your health or your health history with an employer, nor can they ask. A lot of individuals with cancer often confuse omitting with lying, but it is personal information and it is not necessary to share any or all personal information with your employer. It can often come down to how you feel about sharing. Some additional considerations include why you want to share. Is it because you feel you want to? Is it because you know it's necessary in order to access certain protections or benefits? There's really no right answer here because, again, it is a personal decision. It's really just about what your specific needs and your preferences are. It's also typically not an all or nothing scenario. So I often get questions from people who call in or email us asking whether or not to disclose. I like to say that you can always say more later, but you can never say less. So if there is a need for you to divulge more information down the road, I encourage you to be prepared to do so. Just know that you don't have to offer it all up right away. Seeing disclosure on a spectrum, like on this slide, can help you to make the decision of what, how much, and to whom you'll be sharing your information. And then it's important to ask yourself what you know so far. When considering disclosure, it's important to share what you know to be true and not necessarily the what ifs of your circumstance. So getting accurate information from your healthcare provider around timelines and treatment protocols can be really helpful, but you don't necessarily want to tell your employer things are definitive because circumstances always change. So as I mentioned, after the first 3 treatments, you might realize that, oh no, the plan that I had in place was not going to work. So things are changing. So you just, again, remembering things are fluid. If you do decide to disclose, just let people know that you are telling them what you know now and that this can and likely could change. And if it does change, that you're planning to communicate that to them. Really assuring your employer that the dialogue will be open can ease some of their concerns around being kept in the loop and making sure that they know what's going on. So disclosure in the online space can have ramifications in the workplace as well. So we do recommend developing a personal disclosure plan for your online presence as well. So it's a good idea to make clear decisions about what, if any, information about your cancer journey that you are planning to share online and also off. Where are you going to share it in terms of specific websites or blogs? And then as you're thinking through what's going to work best for you, it's a good idea to spend some time considering the potential long-term impact of online disclosure. So in some scenarios, it may be the case that some of you have disclosed at work. Everyone's being really supportive, and that's an outstanding situation to be in, and I wish it was like that for everyone. But the fact is that the internet doesn't go away. So it's just important to think beyond right now and consider the possible long-term impact of that disclosure. None of us can predict the future. So you may find yourself unexpectedly looking for a job 5 years from now, or your supportive boss may move on and be replaced by someone who starts Googling their new staff. And maybe they're not doing it maliciously, but they just want to learn a little bit more about who they're working with. And frankly, there's really just no way to know how that person's going to respond to whatever information they might find about you online. Now, the next step after you've made those decisions is to really communicate those decisions with the people in your network, whether they're friends and family or even just people that you've connected with online, as there are so many stories, unfortunately, from people who experienced accidental disclosure from a loved one online. Again, a lot of this is not with malicious intent, but might have been helped if that they had been a little bit more clear about what their wishes were. And of course, even if you have shared your preferences with your loved ones, it's still a good idea to monitor what others are posting so you have a sense of what's out there. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people that we've heard from whose mom went on Facebook and shared some of her own feelings about the situation, but really didn't take into account that this was a little bit of an invasion of privacy for their child. Finally, it can be a good idea to consider what your relationship is to the larger cancer community. So for example, if you are a volunteer with a cancer-related organization, there might be questions about the affiliation. So it can be really a good idea just to think about how you describe your involvement with them, especially if you're choosing not to share your own diagnosis, because people can certainly infer a lot of things. And so you just want to be prepared that if you are not planning on sharing that aspect of your life with them, that you think of the way that you'll describe your involvement and your interest in it without giving too much away about your own personal situation. Now, when it comes to disclosing at work, like all of the rest of the decisions around sharing the news, it's another incredibly personal decision, and it requires a lot of thought. As I mentioned, it's typically not an all or nothing scenario. So I said before that you're not required to provide information about your health or health history to your employer, current or prospective, and that they cannot ask. But it's important to recognize that there might be situations where you might have to share information in order to access your rights under the law. So again, this doesn't mean sharing every last detail about your diagnosis or your prognosis, but it does mean that you might have to provide some support for why you're eligible to ask for whatever it is that you're asking for. So an example might be that it would be kind of difficult to credibly file a complaint against your employer for discrimination under the ADA if they had technically no idea that you had a condition to discriminate against. So as you're thinking through whether to share or not, it's important to consider all the angles, and this is one. What are the benefits? And of course, always keeping in mind that disclosure is a spectrum, and kind of even just keeping that picture on that slide in your mind, just where on the spectrum do I need to be in order to get what I need and what I want. Now, when deciding whether or not to share information about your cancer status at work, there are two major things to consider overall. So one is really how will treatment interfere with your ability to perform your duties? And then again, as we mentioned in the last slide, what legal benefits are there to sharing this information? Now, with any personal decisions, there are different reasons that people choose to disclose. People are different. Some people are sharers. They can't imagine going through such a big life-changing event and not telling others. But other people might feel very uncomfortable sharing such personal information and are much more private, particularly in a professional environment. But just know, however you feel about sharing is valid, and it should really be taken into account. The individual culture of the workplace may also play a role. Thinking about the various ways that people communicate with each other at work may help you decide if, how, and how much you want to share that information at work. You may also think about whether anyone in your workplace has gone through something similar. So as I mentioned before, they can be a really great resource for how a company handles such situations. It can be really valuable to consider these experiences as you begin to think about what your approach is to sharing your own information. So when contemplating who to tell, that's going to really vary, and it depends on you and your specific circumstances. It's also possible you may find yourself having to have more than one disclosure conversation. So if that is the case, which it might be, we recommend starting with the person that's going to be easiest to talk to. Now, for many people, that's going to be a direct supervisor. This is because, really it's someone with whom you can have an ongoing conversation with. But also they might be able to be an advocate for you with some of the higher ups as your situation progresses forward a little bit. But it's also really important to bear in mind that most managers are not trained to be managers. So this may be the first time that they're having this type of conversation, and they might feel in pretty uncharted territory themselves and not really sure what to do. Unfortunately, this can often put the burden on the employee with cancer to help teach that manager what to do next, as if you're some sort of expert yourself. So what we've come together and created is a manager's toolkit. We created this because survivors asked us for something concrete that they could take it with them into these conversations with their supervisor to kind of ease the burden on them as well. Ultimately, this toolkit is something that outlines how to best support an employee and how to really work with them to make sure that everybody's needs are addressed. So on this slide here, you can see the link to that, and you can download it from our website and print it out. Now, for other people, their supervisor might be out of the question for a plethora of reasons. Maybe it's a bad relationship. Maybe they don't have the authority to make many decisions. There could be a lot of different reasons. So they might want to go to HR instead. The HR department can be a font of information because they're really the ones who understand that handbook that we talked about, and they may have even experienced some of this circumstances with other employees in the past, so they might have a plan in place already. Really, again, the most important thing to disclose in any of these conversations is the idea, again, treatment is fluid. Helping them understand that the things you're sharing now are what you know today and could change next week or next month, and that this is likely an ongoing conversation can just help your employer understand that you do intend to communicate the most up-to-date information that you can, while also, keeping in mind what is relevant and appropriate for you to share with them. So part of the disclosure decision, including figuring out how much to share and with whom, can also involve considering what you know about possible side effects you're likely to experience, especially if you're choosing not to disclose either at all or widely within the organization, because the changes that bodies can go through during treatment, whether they're visible side effects like hair loss or skin changes, or invisible side effects like cognitive changes or a decrease in energy levels, can often disclose that information even if your words don't. So if you're someone who isn't planning to or has already decided not to disclose widely, it can be a really good idea to have a sense of the types of changes you're likely to experience and whether those might be perceived by your coworkers in a way that invites a lot of questions. And from there, it's about knowing how to have prepared responses to any questions that might arise. This way you don't accidentally share any information that you prefer to keep quiet or private. For those of you who are currently working remotely, you'll still want to be mindful about your choices regarding disclosure and privacy. Be careful not to develop a false sense of security just because you're working in a more personal, private space. Ironically, in some ways, you may even need to be more hyper-aware when you're working remotely. Now, every organization handles its cybersecurity and tracking of employee activity a little bit differently. Even if you have a good idea of your company culture, you may not know the full extent of your organization's oversight. So on the very extreme end of the spectrum, some companies routinely use programs that record your every keystroke or take screenshots of your computer desktop, open access to your camera or microphone, or provide detailed reporting on your activity and inactivity on different websites or programs. A company's goal for using these really may not be malicious. It might be focused on helping to measure and support productivity, especially as we all navigate this new virtual remote landscape. But it is important to be aware that working in the digital space does provide more opportunity for a breach of your privacy. So when it comes to your decisions around disclosure, just keep the following in mind. If you work from home and need to participate in video meetings, remember that your coworkers, clients, and others will be able to view your personal space. So if you're really not feeling well one day and you decide to take a Zoom call from bed, just really think about how that might translate and what people might infer from that. Many offices share login information to companies' video conferencing platforms. So really safeguard any personal information by switching to your own account before maybe having your private telehealth appointments. And then also making sure that programs aren't set to auto record just in case there are things that are much more private and you would just not want them to end up on your company's server. Screen sharing is a big thing. I'm screen sharing right now, and you just want to make sure that any personal information you may have on your computer is hidden and not right on your desktop. That no pop-up notifications or emails or even internet browser bookmarks might be able to be seen by others. A lot of companies now that we're remote are using chat applications. So just know that because your employer owns that program, or at least a subscription to it, there's always a chance that your private messages might be reviewed by a supervisor or HR. So the same guidance as screen sharing applies here. Just be really careful about what you're sharing on, company sanctioned programs and software. Be careful not to leave personal accounts open on your work computer. If you do have a personal account, like your email on a work device, just maybe sign out of it at the end of every day, or set up two-factor authentication to ensure that no one can sign in on your account without being notified. And just be really careful not to save medical information on your work computer. Some companies regularly back up all of their data, even when we are remote. So if you saved a file temporarily, you could end up getting stored when the server is backed up, which means that your personal information is on the company server. And of course, just being careful about your internet use and activity. It's easy for a company's network administrator to monitor your internet activity, even if you're browsing in incognito mode. Just think twice about what you're researching on work hours and on your work computer. The point really is to think ahead of time before you engage in certain work-related or personal activities online, and just make those informed choices. This way, any disclosure related to your diagnosis will be a result of your personal decision, and not because you accidentally outed yourself or put stuff on your work computer that wasn't appropriate. Some additional considerations to avoid accidental disclosure include thinking carefully before talking about your diagnosis or medical information. Again, if you are working remotely or in the office, thinking about where you're sharing information. So if you're working on site and there's a break room or a shared kitchen space, look around to see who's in the room before you might start talking about some personal information. You want to evaluate the spaces where you may be taking private phone calls. If you work in a cubicle, the sound carry. If you go into a private conference room, can someone hear from outside the door? Really just all of these things is just keeping in mind that nowhere is fully private, and just really giving it the consideration it deserves so that you're being mindful of your space and your privacy. Just giving some time and energy to preparing for additional conversations and scenarios can also help you prevent accidentally sharing more information than you want to or intend to. So there always is the chance that your diagnosis is brought up by someone in the office. This is another instance where it really helps to be prepared for facing these situations head on. So cancer-related comments can be addressed using a verbal technique, which we call the swivel. It's a verbal formula or pattern that's used in response to a cancer-related comment that might be made by a well-intended colleague. So it really involves acknowledging the cancer-related comment, putting an and right in the middle, and swiveling the conversation around to a topic that's more work-oriented. So an example here is your coworker comes over and says, my uncle had cancer. You could respond by saying, I'm so sorry to hear that. That must have been really hard. And hey, while I have you here, what did you think about the meeting we had yesterday? It might seem a little brash, but ultimately you're shifting the conversation back to a place where you feel comfortable. And this can be really empowering and also indicate to your colleagues that you're still that whole vibrant person with a lot of professional contributions to make, and also value your personal privacy. Now, before we end our conversation for today, I do want to spend a little time talking about incorporating time off into your action plan. We talked earlier about the fact that deciding whether or not to work during treatment doesn't need to be an all or nothing decision. And people may decide to take time off from work for a variety of reasons. Sometimes doing so is a choice that's made to help preserve energy levels or create some life balance, address some challenges that you're having. Other times, taking time off is a necessity if you need to recover from surgery, or if you need to spend some time as an inpatient to receive a particular type of treatment. One thing that's important to consider when incorporating time off into your action plan is just really how long you anticipate being on leave for, because this length of time can also influence the approach that you're going to be taking. Disclosure, again, is a consideration if you decided to take time off. Perhaps you'd only like your direct supervisor and or HR to know about your diagnosis. Others might want their coworkers to be aware of what's going on with them for a variety of reasons. So really just think about what you want to share and with whom as you prepare to take some time off. The Family Medical Leave Act is a federal law that provides job protection when taking time off from work. Some of you may be familiar with it. I'll provide a few more details of that on the next slide. But really, you're going to want to spend some time thinking about what your specific leave plan might look like before having a conversation with your supervisor. It's a moment where using that information that you collected early on, as well as what you've been tracking in your work diary, can really help the conversation with your employer go just a little bit more smoothly. So just a little bit about the Family and Medical Leave Act, or FMLA. It's a federal law that may provide protections when taking time off. This slide really provides a high-level overview of the FMLA, as well as some resources where you can go for information. It's important to note that this law does not automatically apply to everyone. So the qualifications are listed on this slide, but if you are eligible, FMLA may provide up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave, which can be used all at once or in increments as short as a few hours at a time. And health insurance protection is provided while you're out on leave. So again, checking your employee handbook or speaking with your supervisor or HR department to find out whether FMLA is available to you can be really helpful as you make those decisions about working or taking time off. A few recommendations for planning leave of absence, whether it is a short or long-term leave. Short-term leave, identifying a point person can be really helpful. Someone you trust and who's willing to be a centralized source of information about you, your health, your schedule. And it can also save you from having to constantly update people on how you're feeling. And they can also be your go-to person when you want to find out more information while you're out. In the same context, you want to think about what might be allowed while you're out of work. I know at Cancer and Careers, when we are taking the day off, we are not supposed to work. So just understanding the rules around taking time off and what it means to be out of the office is important. With long-term leave, it can be a good idea to stay connected. This can be through LinkedIn, trade associations, conferences. To help offset gaps on a resume, you can try to stay active by consulting or volunteering, maybe engaging in activities that refresh some of those existing skills, or even taking courses that will help you learn new ones. These are really easy ways to stay informed and can also all be done from home, which is really helpful. So really just to recap today, you should feel empowered to make the decisions about work after cancer that align with what your wants and your needs are. You'll want to know what information you'll need and where to find it, and this will really help you to make those informed decisions that you need to be making. Getting organized can not only help you to make those decisions about work after cancer, but can also help to maintain control over your life and just small aspects of your life. Action planning is focused on what your needs are and how realistically they can be addressed. Planning helps to make this process just go that much smoother. And finally, disclosure is a really important piece of this puzzle when making decisions around work after a diagnosis. And you really want to make sure that you're giving it the time it deserves in order to make sure that you feel comfortable and that your needs are going to be taken care of. As I mentioned, these are the legal resources that are helpful. Sissy did send out these slides this morning, but if you didn't get them, please let us know and we'll send you copies so you have these resources on hand. I do want to just point out some upcoming events that are coming up. We do have our 2022 Balancing Work and Cancer schedule posted, and registration is now open. So if you want to take a look, these are the first 3 of the year. We also have our full-day conferences scheduled. The first 2 will continue to be virtual. Our Midwest conference is on March 25th, and our national conference is on June 24th. Here's my contact information. I see that we are at the top of the hour, so I just want to let you know that if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them, and I will stick around for a little bit longer. And it's just a reminder, as Sissy mentioned in the chat, but you can put your questions into the Q&A box if you have any. And I'll just give you a couple minutes to put those in if you have any. So it looks like we have a question from Andrew, who said, I was just diagnosed last week and I'm nervous to bring up the topic with my manager. Do you have any tips on how to specifically start the conversation? This is definitely a really big challenge because getting that conversation started can just feel super overwhelming. But I assure you, once this conversation gets started, it gets easier. Utilizing our manager's toolkit can be really helpful. Practicing with loved ones, friends, family, even a social worker can be really helpful just to kind of get the language right. We do have some resources on our website that do help guide those conversations, some kind of icebreakers of sorts. So I would recommend utilizing some of the resources on our website to address those questions. And this message is from this question is from Becky. I'm feeling overwhelmed by the amount of information that I'm supposed to process after my appointments. What can I do to feel more in control? So utilizing what I mentioned, the work diary is really helpful. Writing things down is really helpful. I know that I have a really poor memory, and so writing things down just helps me feel like I'm on top of things. So I would recommend, when possible, write everything that you have down. Utilizing a recording device if possible. And also just knowing that you don't have to absorb all of the information at once can be really, really helpful as well. All right, I think we'll take one more question. Okay, this question is from Dan. I've been with my job for 4 years and have no idea where my employee handbook is, or if I even have a copy of it anymore. How can I find out the information in there without telling HR about my cancer diagnosis? So I think it's pretty rare that anyone really holds on to those employee handbooks. So it's totally understandable that you don't know where it is and that you might not even have it anymore. It's totally possible for you to just email HR and ask for a copy of it. You don't need to give any information. You are an employee there and you need to check on something. You don't have to give them any information about it. Just say, I wanted to check up on some of our policies. I was wondering if I can have another copy. It doesn't have to be a big thing. I think a lot of us get worried that we need to share more information than is really necessary and find ourselves giving too much away. So again, just being really vague. Don't even need to give your name unless they ask for it, just to confirm that you're an employee. But typically they'll just send you an email. A lot of the time it's on a virtual server, so it's available online as well. All right, so I do want to be mindful of the time, so I am just going to end it here. Again, we will be sending out an email with the evaluation and the post-test. Even if you're not seeking CEUs, we really do appreciate everybody filling out the evaluation so we can know how we're doing. If there are other things that you guys would like to hear about in our series, we are always open ears and we want to make sure that we're providing the content that's most helpful to our audience. So thank you again for joining us today. I hope that this was helpful. Again, my contact information is up here, so if you have any questions that pop up for you after today, I'm happy to answer them. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.